Hey guys, it's James here. 1 month ago today, I got myself one of the new Apple M1 MacBook Pros with a 16-inch display, an M1 Max chip, 64GB of RAM, and 4TB of SSD storage. I have since mixed and mastered music, edited 4K videos, and edited huge raw images on this MacBook Pro, and I want to do some tests for you in a music production context, compare it to my custom-built PC, and share my thoughts on these new M1 MacBook Pros as a working audio engineer. In an upcoming video, I will talk about which M1 Mac computer might be the best for your needs as an audio engineer, a musician, and/or a music producer. This is going to be a long, but I hope very informative video to you guys, so grab some snacks and enjoy. Also, stick to the end for footage of me unboxing and fanboying my M1 MacBook Pro on launch day.
Don't sniff it.
You have to smell new technology.
Oh God.
To sum up my experience as a working professional audio engineer, the M1 Max MacBook Pro has been incredible in all aspects. It is so incredibly fast, so quiet, and so power and thermal efficient. But there are also some hiccups, albeit not entirely Apple's fault. If you do music production, professionally or not, your biggest concern is probably plugin compatibility. It was mine as well. It makes sense because audio companies have always been very slow when it comes to making their plugins compatible with the newest OS. Supposedly, many companies are just waiting on Pace's iLok to support Apple Silicon before they can update their plugins. And who knows when that's gonna be. I'm happy to report that plugin compatibility is not really an issue. I was able to get all the plugins I used running in the M1 native version of Reaper and Logic Pro X, with a couple of exceptions. And of course, plugins are running under Rosetta too unless it's an ARM version. I could not get the AU format of Slate Digital's Virtual Mix Rack working, so I can only use it in Reaper as a VST but not in Logic, since Logic only recognizes audio unit. As of today, the notable plugin companies I know that officially support Apple Silicon are FabFilter, Waves, Valhalla DSP, Overloud, and Toontrack. Now, getting Intel plugins to work in the ARM logic requires a couple of extra steps. First, you should install the plugin and make sure the audio unit format of the plugin is installed. And then you find Logic in the application folder, right-click it, choose Get Info, and check the Run in Rosetta option. Now, launch Logic. You'll see in the startup window that it is now running in Rosetta mode. As Logic is booting up, it will automatically scan for and validate any new plugins you have installed. Most Intel-based plugins will be successfully validated at this point. In a couple of occasions, I've had cases where the Intel-based plugin wouldn't validate on Logic startup, but once I reset and rescanned it in the plugin manager, it worked. So give that a try before giving up on it. Once an Intel plugin is successfully validated in Rosetta Logic, you can use it in ARM Logic. You just have to remember to uncheck the Run in Rosetta mode option. If you're using other DAWs, the procedures are probably going to be different. For example, with Reaper, you can validate Intel-based plugins directly with the ARM version of Reaper. Working with Intel plugins in the ARM version of Reaper and Logic has been pretty smooth, but not without the occasional issues. I've done a few mixes with lots of tracks and Intel plugins in the ARM version of Reaper, and Intel plugins always load just slightly slower than ARM plugins, which is not a big deal at all. Some Intel plugins are also less stable than ARM plugins. There are a couple of Intel plugins that would just freeze the moment I start to tweak it, and the whole session would be frozen as well, and I would have to restart the entire session. The good thing is that it's always the same plugin that would do this, and most Intel plugins are very stable. I think unless you're using some really old plugins that haven't had any software updates for years, you'll be fine. Most audio companies do plan to offer native support for Apple Silicon eventually. Some of you might be concerned about how running Intel plugins via Rosetta mode might affect the CPU usage and how Intel plugins perform compared to the native ARM plugins. So I went and did quite a lot of testing. Now, I'm not a professional tech reviewer, so the tests are not going to be super comprehensive or scientific, but they should give you an idea of what you can expect in practice. First, I tested the multi-core performance of my M1 Max MacBook Pro. I put the ARM version of THU on a stereo guitar DI track and duplicate the track as many times as possible until I get a system overload message when I play all the tracks at the same time. I was able to have 395 tracks playing simultaneously at 16 times oversampling with 128 samples buffer size. Let's take a moment and let that sink in. This is absolutely ridiculous. Just bonkers. And the computer was just a little bit warm, no fan noise whatsoever. It's ridiculous. When I swapped the ARM THU to an Intel THU, I was able to run 372 tracks in ARM logic. However, if I run logic via Rosetta, I was able to run 385 tracks. So far, it seems that in logic, ARM plugins running in ARM logic performs the best, followed by Intel plugins running in Rosetta logic, and the worst performance is Intel plugins running in ARM logic. Next up, I ran those same tests in Reaper, which kind of serves as a token for non-Apple dolls in this scenario, supposedly without Apple's hardware-software optimization magic. With the same 16 times oversampling in THU and 128 samples buffer size, I was able to run 312 tracks of the ARM VST version of THU before the audio starts to crackle. However, a few things surprised me. Reaper supports both VST plugins and AU plugins, and I found that I could run 319 tracks with the ARM AU version of THU, more than I could with the ARM VST version. So despite them both being ARM version, the AU format is somehow more optimized than the VST format in Reaper. What's more interesting is that if I use the Intel VST of THU in ARM Reaper, I can have up to 238 tracks. But if I use the Intel audio unit in Rosetta Reaper, I can have as many as 273 tracks. That's quite a lot more. It seems that at least with this plugin, you get the best performance from pairing the ARM audio unit plugin with ARM Reaper. I'm not sure how much you can extrapolate from these results, but it's still interesting to see the differences. The next test I did was to benchmark the single-core performance of my M1 Max MacBook Pro. I put FabFilter's Saturn 2 on a stereo track where I created as many bands as possible, which is 6, selected heavy saturation mode for each band, used the highest oversampling, and turned on the linear phase. This makes each instance of Saturn to be quite CPU intensive, and I put as many instances of it as possible on one single track. In Logic, I was able to use 7 instances of ARM Saturn 2 and 6 instances of Intel Saturn 2 before the system got overloaded. Not a huge difference there. In ARM Reaper, I was able to use 6 instances of ARM Saturn 2 in VST format or audio unit format, and in Rosetta Reaper, 4 instances of Intel audio unit format of Saturn 2. So the ARM plugin in ARM Logic still gives you the best performance, like with THU, and in ARM Reaper, the ARM VST and audio unit offer the same performance, which is better than using the Intel plugin in Rosetta Reaper. My next test was to see how the M1 Max chip handles a mixing into the mastering chain scenario. First, on the master bus, I inserted Ozone Maximizer with the IRC4 mode, which is very heavy on the CPU. Then I put Saturn 2 on a stereo track with 2 bands, minimum phase, and high oversampling, and duplicate the track as many times as possible. The results are quite interesting. In ARM Logic, it could handle 273 tracks, while Rosetta Logic would handle 272 tracks. Basically the same performance, which is unexpected. My guess is that the Ozone Maximizer plugin being an Intel-based only plugin is what bottlenecked the ARM logic performance. So I swapped the Ozone Maximizer for Pro L2, which is an M1 native limiter. In Pro L2, I set oversampling to 32 times, turned on true peak limiting, and enabled 16-bit dithering, just to make it as CPU intensive as possible. ARM logic was able to handle 210 tracks, but in Rosetta mode, 184 tracks, which was quite a performance drop. ARM Reaper could handle 164 tracks when Pro L2 is in ARM audio unit format, but in ARM VST format, the performance dropped to 162 tracks. I would say this is probably within the margin of error. Intel Reaper, however, could only handle 151 tracks. The last test I did was to see if the system slows down drastically when I use more than the available RAM. I wanted to test this because RAM is crucial for using sample libraries. When a system runs out of RAM, memory swapping will happen, which basically means that the system will start using your hard drive space as temporary RAM. Because normal HDDs and SSDs are much slower than RAM, when a lot of memory swapping happens, your system would become very laggy. I'm sure you have experienced this. You have way too many Chrome tabs or applications open, and your computer becomes barely responsive. Now, the M1 Max MacBook Pros have insanely fast SSDs, which theoretically should allow you to use SSD storage like RAM via memory swapping without experiencing any system slowdown. If that's the case, it means that musicians and producers who use a lot of sample libraries can save some money by getting less RAM on these new MacBook Pros without sacrificing performance. Turns out that's too good to be true to an extent. In Logic, I put Superior Drummer 3 on a track and created a huge kit with full mic bleed that used 7.6 GB worth of samples. I was able to duplicate it 15 times before Logic told me an audio unit plugin isn't working and Logic had to quit. So a total of 16 instances of SD3 using about 123 GB of RAM. I did the same test in Reaper and got the same result. So there is a limit to how much swap memory you can use. When the RAM was maxed out and there was almost 75 gigs in swap memory, the computer was still very responsive, but I could clearly tell it was struggling a bit. Scrolling web pages got a little bit choppy at times, applications were slightly slower. It felt kind of like using my previous MacBook Pro, which was a 2018 13-inch Touch Bar base model. At this state, I don't think the computer can handle anything else that is super CPU intensive like video editing or photo editing or even a huge mixing session. So if you regularly use over 100 gigs of RAM for your music production work, you should probably skip these MacBook Pros. Just for fun, I did the same tests on my custom built PC with the same 128 buffer size. Granted, I built a PC 5 years ago, so this is not supposed to be a fair comparison by any stretch of the imagination. It's just to see how well my 5-year-old PC holds up or how far technology has advanced. I did build it specifically for music production, so its specs are actually quite good at the time. Compared to the 395 tracks that ARM Logic could handle with an MSIM on each track, my PC could handle 194 tracks in Reaper, which honestly is still quite impressive. While ARM Logic could handle 7 instances of Saturn II with CPU-intensive settings on one single track, the PC could only handle 3. Additionally, Reaper on my PC could handle 44 tracks of Saturn II with Ozone Maximizer on the master bus, while ARM Logic could handle 273. That's quite a huge difference there. When the Ozone Maximizer was swapped with Pro L2 with 32 times oversampling and 16-bit dithering, Reaper could only handle 53 tracks before the playback started to crackle, compared to the whooping 210 tracks with ARM Logic. Lastly, once I maxed out the RAM on my PC, the entire computer becomes so sluggish that I could barely use it. Whereas with the M1 Max MacBook Pro, even with 123 gigs in swap memory, the computer was still quite responsive. That's all the tests I did. And I think we can all agree that these new M1 Pro and Max chips from Apple are absolutely insane and overkill for music production. In terms of performance, there's no question that these MacBook Pros can very easily meet the needs of audio professionals and musicians on any level, with tons of power left to spare. These laptops are also going to be fantastic for touring musicians because the battery lasts so long. I have heard musicians who said they were able to get through a 7-hour rehearsal while using Mainstage with 50% battery left. And that's with the 2020 M1 MacBook Pro. The 2021 M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros have even longer battery life, so you can imagine how big of an asset that can be to touring musicians. Personally, as someone who does intensive tasks in audio engineering, video production, and photography, and needs portability, I absolutely believe that these M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros are the best computers you can get in the market for the money right now for multimedia content creation. However, it may not be right for you if music production is all that you do. I'll be uploading a video diving into which M1 computers is the best for your needs, so subscribe if you want to learn more about that. Now I'm going to answer some questions that you guys submitted on my Instagram story. Morris asked, how many plugins of yours don't work? There's Slate's VMR. It doesn't work in Logic, but it does in Reaper. JST's Gain Reduction 2 didn't work on either DAW. Same with D16 Repeater, and that's pretty much it. Even Pot Farm plugins work fine. Isaiah asked, how has the performance been? And if I have any issue running big sessions? Well, as I showed in this video, the performance is absolutely insane. And nope, I was able to run mixing sessions with almost 200 tracks and with a full mastering chain just fine. The fans didn't even kick in for a bit. And most plugins were running under Rosetta, which means that once all the plugins receive official M1 support, you get even more performance. Now I know, Isaiah, you also do some video stuff, so I wanted to tell you that these new M1 MacBook Pros are pretty much built for video production. The video performance of these laptops are off the charts. Just watch a few benchmarking videos on YouTube and you know what I mean. VYRAH Studios asked multiple questions. My apologies if I butcher your studio name. You asked, which audio interface are you using? I'm using the RME Babyface Pro. How do you connect all your hardware to the MacBook Pro? Well, first of all, I'm mixing and mastering all in the box, so I don't need a patch bay or an interface with many inputs and outputs. I use a USB-C hub to connect the RME Babyface Pro, the iLock USB, and my external drives. And I connect my external 4K monitor directly to the MacBook Pro's HDMI port. Yes, it has an HDMI port. What? He also asked, what problems do you have? Great question. Aside from the few Intel plugins that don't work, I do want to offer a word of caution about Logic projects that were created in an Intel-based Mac. For some reason, when I tried opening one of my old Logic projects on my M1 Max MacBook Pro, it would just crash every time, even though I have all the plugins in the project installed. I tried opening it in Rosetta mode, but it still didn't work. Thankfully, this project is nothing important, but this could be a big issue for those who use Logic as their main DAW. I suspect it's probably due to some Intel plugins not being compatible rather than Logic's fault, and hopefully once I update the plugins with the ARM version, I won't have this problem anymore. My Reaper projects created on my PC all opened fine, but there is one issue here. While most plugins come in VST and audio unit formats, and both are technically supported by Reaper, for some plugins, Reaper only recognizes the audio unit format or the VST format, but not both. That means that if Reaper only recognizes the audio unit format, but not the VST format on your M1 Mac, and you used the VST format when you created the project in Windows, that plugin will be marked as offline by Reaper, and you're going to lose the setting when you open it on your M1 Mac, even if you have the plugin installed. I know that sounded really convoluted, but I honestly don't know how else to word it. Basically, if you want to open a DAW project from another computer on your new M1 Mac, you will need to make sure the right plugin formats are working on your new Mac. That's it for this video. It took me a long time to make this one, so please consider giving it a like if you find it informative and helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the new M1 Max MacBook Pros for music production or even video production. Remember, in an upcoming video, I'll be talking about which M1 Mac is right for you as an audio engineer, a musician, and or a music producer. So subscribe so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. All right, I got the new Apple Silicon MacBook Pro. This one is the 16-inch. As you can see, it's huge. 16-inch with M1 Max 64 gigabyte of RAM and 4 terabyte of SSD. So that's a really beefed out laptop right here. Now I'm gonna unbox it. And behind the camera is my lovely fiance.
Hey.
Thank you for doing this. Do you want to get a close-up shot in here? Oh, this is thick.
It just looks like your other laptop.
What? No, it does not. Wait, hold on. You will see why it looks different. Alright, this is so huge. There's the boring stuff here. Well, the cable is braided, so that's nice. It's braided, so let's get rid of that. Alright, I'm gonna open this one. Am I supposed to be ripping this?
Too late now.
Do you see any difference? Look at the side.
It looks beefier.
Yeah. All right.
Ooh, it's a thick boy.
Thick boy. Look, you can do a close up. Look at the sides, because this is a really different design. Look at the ports. They brought the ports back.
You mean you have a headphone jack?
No, I had a headphone jack, but I didn't have this.
And what is that?
HDMI and also a SD card slot. Remember, I always ask you to bring my my dongle.
No more dongo.
Okay, I want to. Do you want to come around a little bit here?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Oh. That was perfect.
Yay.
How's it feel? Smooth?
So good.
How is it different? Is it a different experience? Don't sniff it.
You have to smell new technology.
Oh God. Smells like metal, rubber.
Smells like new laptop.
All right, put that in the
Very
perfume.
Put that in perfume?
Yeah. Maybe a candle.
All right, I think you can stop the video now.
Well, just keep rolling.
Well, then there's not much going on after. I'm just gonna be here,
Admiring
and setting up.
and ignoring me.
I'm moving my entire operation from here. Well, you can show. This is my PC. You
Which
can show the PC there.
Looks a lot
Tower.
less impressive.
Yeah, we can show the tower. Oh my God. Yeah, so that's my custom built PC. That's where I did most of my work, like audio stuff.
Disregard the
video.
chocolate bar.
Yeah. Stop. Yeah, so I'm moving everything into this one. That's why I spec'd it out so much.
That sounds dangerous.
Well, why is that dangerous?
Everything in one place.
Yeah, but that's. I mean, you have everything in one place at
That's
your
fair.
work. Yeah. So yeah, really looking forward to. Oh, this is so good. Oh my God, look at this. This trackpad. It's like huge.
Why is it aggressively big?
Because it's useful.
Okay.
That's why. Yeah, it keeps saying hello in different languages.
Well, it's friendly of it.
Yeah.
It's better than it saying, like, die.
Yeah, that's true. That would be funny. All right. I think you can shut it off. I gotta enjoy.
Bye.
Bye.